Hi guys, Julia here from JM Squared Vintage. Welcome back to the channel. Today I am here with something a little bit different. So today I'm going to be dipping in something that is really good for like brand new resellers to hear and probably pretty good for a lot of us who've been doing this for a long time to hear. Just to kind of like check ourselves because we need to do this from time to time, right? But today I'm going to be talking about 10 things that I wish I knew before I got started in reselling. But before we get started here, guys, if this is your first time here, if this is your first time stumbling on my channel, first and foremost, welcome. I am Julia. That is my name. We talk all things thrifting and vintage and the business of reselling on the internet here. If that sounds like something that you might be into, consider hitting subscribe down below. I would love to have you along on this journey. But without further ado, guys, we've got a lot to talk about here. So why don't you go grab yourself a snack, grab yourself a drink. You know I've got my matcha latte. So sit back, relax, and let's get into it. Before we get into the tips, I want to take a quick minute to thank Vendoo for sponsoring this video. Now, I am going to be talking about Vendoo a lot in this video because it is one of the kind of key lessons I learned really early on in my reselling journey. But the bottom line is, if you want to grow your business, whether you are a hobby reseller, somebody who wants to build their reselling business to like a reliable side hustle income stream, or even to a full-time job, the quickest and easiest way to do that is to cross-list across multiple marketplaces. At the end of the day, reselling is a numbers game. The more eyeballs on your items, the more likely you are to find the buyer for that item. And to do it without a cross-lister like Vendoo is a fool's errand of the highest ilk. I lasted exactly 1 week and I only had 50 items for sale. So imagine what my business would look like right now if I didn't have Vendoo on my side. Vendoo cuts my listing time down about 10 minutes per item. And Vendoo has all the marketplaces you want to be on. Poshmark, eBay, Depop, Mercari, Etsy, Shopify, Vestiaire, Grailed, you name it, they've got it. And with their automation tools, they help take more of that busy work off of your plate. They will send auto offers for you. So when somebody likes your item, they'll send them an offer in a timely fashion. So it's generally hitting them while they're still shopping without you having to pay attention and babysit the marketplace. They have an auto delist feature where if something sells on, say, eBay, it'll automatically delist it from any marketplace you have it listed on, so you don't have to worry about double selling things. That's every reseller's worst nightmare. And for me, it serves really as my central repository for my inventory, right? So I am generally working directly out of Vendoo and feeding out into my different marketplaces. It is the literal backbone of my tech stack for my business. And when you calculate the hours that it saves me every month, more on that a little bit later in the video, it is probably the investment I make with the best ROI for my business, period. And that includes inventory. So guys, if you are ready to take your business to the next level, if you are ready to scale and make more money reselling, the easiest way to do that is cross-listing, and the best way to do that is with Vendoo. So if you are interested in giving Vendoo a try, click the link in the description down below and take 25% off of your first month. And if you are already a Vendoo user and you love it, or if you try it and you end up loving it, check out their annual plans. You can get up to 2 months free with their annual plans, and we are, always looking for ways to optimize our business spend, right? So guys, if you're ready to start cross-listing, give Vendoo a try. I've said this before and I'll say it again. You will wonder why you haven't started sooner. Now, let's get into the tips. Now, a little bit of preface. I've been more or less reselling since I was like 18 years old. I was very, very, very early on eBay, but it wasn't until a couple years ago that I really started reselling like as a business. So really going out and intentionally sourcing to resell on the secondhand market. But when I first got into reselling in earnest, and I think a lot of people fall into this trap, I thought that the name on the tag was the end all be all. And that brings us to our first thing on our list, and that is that not every brand is a good buy. Short summary here is that there's always nuance. But when I first got started, I really thought that if it was a brand that I knew, we'll take Free People, because Free People's a really good brand to kind of illustrate this point, because they probably have like the widest spread between things on the low end and things on the high end, right? But you're first getting into this and you're like, oh, Free People's an expensive store. You see a Free People tag, you buy it, especially if you're out in a regular thrift store. Very dangerous game to play. Like ultimately, it's not necessarily brands that sell. There are some exceptions to that, but it's products that sell. So most brands make great stuff, mediocre stuff, and stuff that absolutely nobody wants. With my early thinking, if I were to see a Free People top right next to like an unbranded linen top, I would have automatically assumed that the Free People top is better because it's Free People and it's an expensive brand and whatever. But that's not necessarily the case. So today, when I find a piece from a brand that I recognize as high end, that's really just the beginning of the evaluation. From there, I take a look at the specific piece, the fabric, the design, the aesthetic, the size, etc. And of course, what the sourcing cost is, right? Like there are absolutely pieces from Free People, using the same example, that I will buy at the bins and I will not buy at the regular thrift store. The little bralettes, case in point. They're totally fine and a good profit at the sourcing costs of bins, but you're probably not going to make the profit that you want paying full thrift store prices for that same piece. This is also where keeping a finger on the pulse of what's happening in fashion really comes into play. Because for me, and the way that I do things, there are things that I buy just for the brand. And that's going to be things with brands that people are really kind of crazy over. Either, your luxury brands, your Gucci, your Brunello Cucinelli, or things like Bluefish, which is an interesting like art to wear log and look brand. People will buy pretty much anything from those brands. Then there are things that I buy for style that are just kind of on trend with what is happening right now. Doesn't matter where it's from. Doesn't matter if it has a label or not. But for those kind of pieces, if it has a good label, that's gravy, right? So it'll sell for X amount just based on the style. And if it's from a really good or a high-end brand, it'll sell for that much more, right? So over time, I've developed a lot of nuance to how I source. So for me, when I'm outsourcing, I generally have 3 buckets, right? It's either going to be an incredible brand, and that list of brands is pretty small that I will buy just about anything from. So it's either going to be good brand, it's going to be really good style, and the ideal situation is that you have really good style from a really good brand. But by no means should you be sourcing on brand alone. The second thing I want to talk about is retail price point, because in our world, expensive doesn't mean valuable. In other words, having a really high retail price does not translate proportionately to what you are going to sell it for on the secondhand market. Early on, I would see retail prices of like $500, $600, and I would be, oh my God, I'm going to get so much money for this when I resell it. And that's not necessarily the case. There are a lot of things that I'll buy, that are extremely expensive brands. Think like James Purse, think Eileen Fisher, think Vince. These are incredibly expensive brands to buy retail. They resell, for the most part, in the bread and butter kind of territory, in that $20 to $40 range. Of course, there are some pieces from all of those lines that are going to sell well above that. But for the most part, a lot of the pieces from those kind of brands will sell in that bread and butter range, no matter what that retail price was. And the opposite is also true. Something being inexpensive retail doesn't necessarily translate to it being inexpensive on the resale market. There is scarcity in pieces. Somebody who does a limited drop, maybe the limited drop pieces are like $40 and they resell for $60. So that's a thing. Number 2, there is virality. Maybe somebody famous wore, this sweater on a TV show and all of a sudden everybody's looking for it. I remember distinctly early on in my reselling, there was this like denim chambray dress from Zara that had gone viral from somebody. I can't even remember who it was, but it was like a $48 dress maybe. And I think I sold it for like $115. So like it can go the other way. And then there's also more like niche brands, more like alternative brands. When you're dealing with a lot of like alternative clothing, these things sell. They're not cheap, but they're in general like, mid-price to like maybe slightly higher mid-price. And they tend to resell for a really good percentage of what they sell for retail because they have such a dedicated buyer base, right? So an expensive retail price does not in any way automatically dictate that it's going to be valuable on the resale market, and vice versa. Next up, we're going to talk about how this is no easy breezy job. I think a lot of people get into reselling because they love to thrift and they think that it's going to be a really easy way to make money. And it can be a fun hobby, but if you are trying to make this a business, it is a lot of work. You've got to be out there sourcing. That's a lot of effort. You got to bring it home. You've got to photograph. You've got to list it. You've got to do all the things that you have to do. You have to manage your marketplaces, relist, all those things. For me, thank goodness, Vendu takes a lot of that off of my plate, but it's still a ton of work, right? It's hard work. You can be sourcing in a hot Goodwill bin situation. Like it's an honest day's pay for a hard day's work. And to me, there's nothing I would rather be doing, right? Like it's hard work, but to me, it feels like play. I have people who are like, you're always working. working. I'm like, but it's like something I would do for fun anyway, That's kind of the benefit for me of reselling professionally. But it is, make no mistake about it, a ton of work. I think a lot of people get into this, pie in the sky, it's going to be easy, I'm going to find all the things. You really have to be able to like mentally handle the ups and downs and ride the waves of, demand and all the things that come with reselling. But, if that's something that you can stomach, this is for you, because this is the most fun I've ever had at work, ever. But make no mistake about it, I'm working harder than I've ever worked in my entire life. Okay, next up, and this one's going to be weirdly a controversial hot take, but sell-through rate isn't the only thing that matters. I feel like as I've watched a lot of content creators, it has just become so laser focused on sell-through rate. And listen, if your goal is to have just a super high velocity sales machine, like that's a different beast, right? But for me, sell-through rate is useful information, but it is not the whole business. Sometimes I will absolutely buy something that I know is going to sit for a while, but it'll be well worth it because the margin is worth it. For example, you find a Chanel suit, right? Like that's not necessarily going to be a super fast seller, but when you ultimately sell it, it's going to be well worth holding on to it for however long. And I really love vintage pieces, right? And vintage is in general just going to take a little bit longer to move because it's a specific buyer who's going to buy it. But to me, that not only brings joy, it also usually sells for a much higher rate than a lot of the regular stuff that I pick up. So that is a trade-off that is well worth it for me and my business. As always, please look at these things through the lens of your individual business because everybody's business is different. But yeah, if I can spend $10 on something that I know is going to take a little bit longer, but it's going to turn into $150, like I'm not going to not pick it up because there's not 47 of them selling every week. You know what I'm saying? There's a big difference between like dead inventory and inventory that requires the right buyer. Right? It's really easy to get locked into a mindset of a very set formula when you are, outsourcing in terms of what you're going to pick up. But I would advise everybody to have just kind of a set of like floating criteria. Again, I see like a vintage dress, right? That I absolutely love. It brings me joy. It's something that is like a kick for me to have come through my hands. Like that's worth it. Even the time sitting in my inventory where I get to pull it out and look at it from time to time is worth it for some of these pieces. So absolutely check sell-through rate. That is important, but it is not everything. Just make it one piece of the toolkit, along with your personal preferences, your desired profit margin, your storage situation, the inventory that you have available to you, and the kind of business you want to run and where you want to sell it. All of those should dictate what you do end up picking up. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is measurements. Another hot button topic for some reason for resellers, and I don't understand why it is. Guys, measurements prevent returns, and measurements help make sales. Plain and simple. And I wish somebody had drilled this into my head when I first started. This is probably the one thing that I wish was really drilled into my brain. My initial thinking when I first got started was, oh, well, I store all my inventory kind of how I store my regular clothes, either hung up in a closet or in bins or in shelves. So I can always pull out an item to like grab measurements if somebody asks for them. Let me tell you guys, people will ask for them. So just take the measurements as you're photographing the item. You don't have to do the whole layout where you have the ruler over. People go absolutely nuts showing the measurements. And like every time I see that, I know that somebody has just been raked over the coals by somebody on measurements. But let me tell you, if you are in the middle of a busy day and somebody's like, hey, can you get me this measurement, and this measurement on this dress? Number one, they're asking for that because they're making sure that it's going to fit them. Like there's a lot of people that just won't provide measurements if asked, which I get that a lot of people don't complete the purchase, but they're asking because they need to know whether or not it'll fit it. Like as a person who has a larger bust than my frame, I have to ask that question if it's not provided because I don't know if that garment in my size is going to fit because it might not fit over this. Like there's a reason I'm asking. So number one, if anybody asks for a specific measurement, get it for them because they're asking for a reason. Number two, if you can head that off at the pass and get all the pertinent measurements as you're photographing while the item is in your hand, then you don't have to worry about going into your closet or digging through a bin to pull it out just to get those measurements. I get that that's annoying, so just head it off at the pass and do it while you're photographing. For me, what I do, I'll do a pit-to-pit measurement. If it's like a dress and it's rigid, I will get a waist measurement at like the narrowest part of the waist. Same deal if it's something that's kind of cut close to the body, I will also also get the measurement over the hip. These are all lay flat. I don't do circumference. And then I'll do a length measurement. And that usually covers all the bases. If I have jeans or pants, I'm getting the waist, I'm getting the front rise, and I'm getting the inseam. And if it's a very wide leg pair of pants, I'm going to get the leg opening as well. Now, do I do this on every item? Like, no. There are those We the Free t-shirts that are extra oversized. Like you don't need to do it on stuff like that because it's just very oversized. But especially if you are dealing with rigid fabrics, something that is tailored, something that's a little bit dressier, consider the fact that everybody's bodies are a little bit different. Some people are top heavy, some people are bottom heavy. They need to make sure it's, going to fit their top and also over their hips, right? Like there's a reason these people are asking for it. So guys, measurements, ideally put them in as you're listing. Save yourself the bother down the road when somebody inevitably comes and asks for measurements. And this goes double, triple, quadruple for anything vintage. Vintage sizing is so different from today's sizing. So what I do in this situation, if I have, say, like a vintage piece that's marked as a size 12, but it would measure to a modern size 8. In the listing title, and then again in the listing description, I will say, vintage tagged size 12 fits modern size 8. And then in the drop down for size, I will put the modern size in there, and I'll just make extra references to like, this is a vintage tagged item. Please confirm measurements below, and I'll put all the, relevant measurements. It is worth the additional 2 minutes extra investment as you're photographing to save yourself 10 to 15 minutes every time one of those questions comes through. And like I said, I know I still have listings out there that don't have measurements on them, and inevitably those are going to be the ones that people come and ask me questions about. But it's fine. Pretty much everything for the last couple of years has had measurements in it, and I recommend you do the same. At the end of the day, people don't take care of their clothes the way that you take care of them, right? So say I'm a Madewell jeans girl. I love Madewell jeans. I know exactly what size I am and which cuts. I will always ask for measurements on them because people put them in the dryer, and I have never put a pair of my jeans in the dryer. You know what I'm saying? So I don't want to have something that's shrunk. I don't want to have something that's shortened. So take that little extra time and get those measurements. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is your photography. You want to photograph better, not necessarily more, but photograph better. Aside from using keywords to get your listing to show up in search results, your photographs are the single most important thing that you can have in your listing. Because if people can't see clearly what you have, they will scroll right by, because surely there will be 3 or 4 others that they can see clearly, right? Now, I'm not saying don't photograph a lot. I'm saying photograph thoroughly, but photograph as good as humanly possible. If you've been doing this for a long time and it's something you struggle with, or if you're brand new to this, these are a few tips that can help you out. Number 1, background matters. You want to photograph on as clear of a background as you can. Typically, I would aim to make that against a wall or against a solid background. In my case, I will photograph my mannequin out in my hallway, which has a door there, but it's still up against a wall. You can really clearly see the garment. And if it's something where I feel like it's a little muddy in the background, I'll use a background remover. Lighting also matters, and lighting can be really tough, and lighting can get into some really kind of tricky situations with color. So for me, I photograph in this room, and this room at peak daylight is incredibly bright and well and evenly lit. So I'm able to photograph in here without light assistance. If I'm photographing and it's a gray day and I'm not getting a lot of light, I have 2 studio panel lights that kind of give me even light because I'm getting light from both sides. In a pinch, you can use a ring light. If you're only getting light from one window and you need to fill in the other side, you can use a ring light or a single light to kind of get the other side. But lighting matters, and you really want to make sure that as you're photographing this, you're telling the whole story of the garment, right? So for me, if I'm photographing something hung up, I'm doing a front shot. I will usually pull out the sleeve to show the silhouette of the sleeve and the silhouette of the actual garment. I will do close-ups of any details, like if there's embroidery or beading or whatever, I'll do close-ups of that. Or if it's an interesting textured fabric, I'll try to get a really good close-up of the texture so people can kind of understand what that's made of. Then I'll take a picture of, this is literally the order that I go in as I'm photographing. Then I'll take a picture of the internal brand label. And this is important because if you're photographing on your phone, iPhone cameras do a lot of post-production in the lens, as you're shooting. So if you get up close to that tag and you have kind of uneven lighting going on, right? Typically that's going to be the truest representation of the color because you're close enough to get a really true read. And if I have something that kind of looks different from picture to picture, which is unavoidable sometimes, right? None of us are professional photographers, so we do the best that we can. If you have a situation where the color kind of looks different from picture to picture, find the picture that has the truest representation of the color and note that when you mention the color. So it's olive green, color looks truest to real life in the close-up of the label, whatever. From there, I flip it over and I take whatever relevant photos of the back, and then I take pictures of all the measurements. And that's basically so I don't have to write them down. I don't list the pictures with the measuring tape, but I have them there just for me in my listing. And if I'm photographing on the mannequin, I always make sure that I get a side profile shot as well, so people can kind of see how the dress hangs from the side. But at the end of the day, when you're developing your picture process, you really want to think about like the buyer's journey. Like, what are the questions the buyer is going to ask? Like, what does the back look like? What does the hem look like? Can I get up close on that embroidery? What is that fabric like? And again, you don't have to go over the top. You don't have to take pictures of every little stitch, but the really pertinent things, you want people to have a real working knowledge of what it is that they're buying, and you can tell that story through the photographs. So again, try to have a very clean background, just because the pictures when people are scrolling are this big. If you're photographing hung up in front of a cluttered background, you're not going to be able to see the item. So if you're in a situation where you don't have the luxury of a wall that you can take a picture in front of, or a slant board, some people have full-on setups, it's amazing. You can use a background remover tool to give it an all-white background. Vendoo has one of those built into their platform, so it's easy peasy. You select what pictures you want to remove the background from and do it. So if you don't have the option to actually photograph outside of a cluttered environment, you can at least remove the background in post. Okay, next up, we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, and that is weird and well-made sells. The weird stuff sells. Now, this is something that I learned very early on. And when I say very early on, I mean back a few decades ago when I started reselling as a hobby. But the point remains, if you see something that is well made, but it is super weird, it is super unusual, maybe you think it's hideous, but it's impeccably made, or it feels really unique, you've never seen anything like it, you should absolutely be picking that up and taking a second look at it. Just because something isn't the most popular thing in the world doesn't mean that it's not going to net you a great profit. For example, years and years and years and years ago, this is something that me and my mom bring up all the time. We've bought and sold vintage housewares over on Etsy since I want to say 2013. And she's got a really great eye for quality, right? So she picked up this cake plate. And I don't know if I can still find the picture of it, but if I can, I'll put it right here, because this sold many moons ago. And she sent me the pictures and she's like, this is the ugliest thing I've ever seen. And I remember telling her, I agree, this is the ugliest thing I've ever seen. It was just ugly. I don't know how else to describe it. It was just an ugly thing. Not in the kind of cool brutalist way. It was just ugh. But it was signed and it was made of really nice porcelain and all of that. So we put it up and sold it. I want to say we sold it for $100. And we got the most glowing review on that thing. This woman was just gushing over it. And that was the moment where the light switch flipped for me, where I really started to take my personal preference, my personal taste out of those kind of buying decisions. So take the would I wear this out of the equation. You know what I'm saying? When you're dealing with something that is unique and distinctive, there might be a smaller audience, but that smaller audience could be really enthusiastic enough to pay a great price for that item. Personally, I would rather find something that 100 people find absolutely amazing than find something that 10,000 people find mid. So weird and well made in my world are words to live by. Weird sells. Next up, I want to talk about organization and cross-listing. The old phrase is, if you start ready, you don't have to get ready, and that could never apply to anything more than starting your own business. If reselling is something that you are looking to build a steady part-time income from, or even a full-time income from, organization and cross-listing is the key. Number one, cross-listing insulates you from the ebbs and flows of the different marketplaces and easily increases the amount of eyeballs that will see your listings, right? So it is advantageous to your bottom line to be on all the different marketplaces, and you truly cannot do that without a cross-lister. You're welcome to try, but we'll see you in a week. I lasted exactly 1 week when I had 50 items for sale. I can't even imagine attempting that today. I don't want to think about it. I don't even want to think about it. And the same with organization in terms of your receipts, in terms of your expenses, in terms of, how you run the business side of your business, right? Stay organized, stay on top of it. And that way, come tax season, you're not scrambling to get all yourself together. Also, I am talking to myself here because I need to be better with that. But if you have a system, stick to the system. The system will help your business run. And the same level of organization also needs to apply to your time. A lot of us get into this business because we love thrifting and now we get to thrift for a living, right? But thrifting and sourcing is really only like 25% of what we do. A lot of it is listing. A lot of it is, inventory management, pulling, packing, shipping, laundry, all of that kind of stuff, right? So I urge you to take a look at your schedule, like the time you have available to you, whether it's, you're a part-time situation. So what do you have outside of your day job, your kids, whatever? Or if you're full-time, take a look at your week and say, okay, cool, I can photograph all of my things on this day. Every day I'm going to list 5 things. Where it gets very overwhelming is when you have like a death pile. You've got a pile up to here of inventory that you need to photograph and list, right? People go into like analysis paralysis, right? Where you're just too overwhelmed to even start. But if you kind of schedule it a little bit a day, bite-sized chunks, everything is manageable. So for me, how I run it, and maybe this helps you, is that I list 5 things every day. I write the listings for 5 things every day. I relist at least 10 things every day, right? And that takes me about an hour. When I go out sourcing, I get a whole load of stuff from the bins, or I go to a couple different thrift stores and I got a whole load of stuff. I will photograph everything in one day, just because I have to set up stuff for photography and I don't want to have to set that up and break it down every single day, right? That's what works in the space that I have available to me. I ship on set days a week, right? So I have all of these things kind of scheduled so I never feel overwhelmed with the tasks that I have to do. Everything that needs to be broken up into bite-sized chunks is broken up into bite-sized chunks, and things that work better when I do them all together all at once are done like that. And I usually try to be a few weeks ahead. That way, if the yen to thrift hits me on a Tuesday when I would normally be photographing, I can go and do that thrifting, right? I've got a little bit of wiggle room. But again, that takes organization to get yourself to that point. So sit down and think about, what are the tasks that you need to do? What are the tasks that you hate doing? Because those are the things you need to have the most regimented. And formulate a manageable and sustainable, that is the key word, sustainable plan for getting it all done. Leverage the tools that you have that can take some of the work off of your plate, schedule the unpleasant tasks and ideally get those done first, and make a plan for those huge tasks to break it up into bite-sized chunks so you can actually make some progress. And you'll be well on your way. Okay. The next thing I want to say, and this is not just for resellers, this is for consultants, this is for everybody out there. Your time is worth something, and I want you to figure out what that is. If you find something and it's going to be 30 minutes of work to get it laundered, maybe it's got a lot of stains, maybe it's got a little thing that needs to be mended, whatever it is. If you're only going to sell that for $20, that is not worth your time. So when you are factoring in your costs, even though this isn't necessarily going to show up on your taxes unless you're in a different business structure, which is a different conversation entirely, I want you to start considering the value of your time. This is a perfect example, but it doesn't have anything to do with reselling, but I always think about getting your oil changed. Pretty much anybody has the skill set required to change oil in a car. But by the time you've driven to the auto parts store to get the oil, maybe you need all synthetic oil, so that's kind of expensive, and you've gotten all the filters and all the things you need. And then the 2 to 3 hours it's going to take you, especially if this is your first or second time doing this. And then the time it takes to go back to the auto parts store to dispose of the old oil. That's a lot of time. What's your hourly rate, right? So say you want to pay yourself $50 an hour. That's your goal, right? So say that all in ends up taking you about 5 or 6 hours. At $50 an hour, that's $250, where you could take it to Jiffy Lube or you could take it to wherever, get your oil changed for $60 or $70, and you don't have to deal with it, right? That is the way I want you to think about your time. Your time is the single most valuable asset that you have, and it is the single most finite. So I want you to treat it as such. And use that to help buying decisions and investment decisions for your business, right? A perfect example in the reselling world, right? I use Vendoo. I know I'm talking about Vendoo a lot, and I know they've sponsored this video, but I would be talking about this whether they sponsored this or not. So using Vendoo to cross-list ends up saving me about 10 minutes per item. So right there, right off the bat, that ends up saving me about 25 hours per month, and that's just in the cross-listing. That's not in all of the other automations that they have available. So if I'm putting that investment up against the value of my time scrutiny as as I look at every investment I make in my business, that would be about $1,200 worth of my time. Is the cost of it significantly lower than that? Sure is. So that's a great investment that not only gives me like the peace of mind of things running kind of in the background, but also saves me buckets of time per month. So please, please, please value your time, put a dollar amount on it, and use that calculation. It is the best way to make smart investments in your business and save you from hitting burnout. And then finally, guys, this is going to feel a little woo-woo, but guys, every mistake is a lesson learned. I wish I could go back to the early days and tell myself to stop beating myself up about the bad buys that I made, because like the fact of the matter is you're going to make them. You're going to continue making them until the last day you do this as a job. You know what I'm saying? Like, I still make mistakes all the time. Everybody makes mistakes. The important thing, and I see this a lot, like I'm on all of these Facebook groups where people get just like really upset and they get down on, like you will make mistakes. Expect it. You will take losses. Expect it. The important thing is that you learn, why it was a mistake. Every single mistake we make offers us something to learn and put in our arsenal and take forward with us into our business. But you're going to buy something that you think is amazing and nobody wants it. You are going to miss a flaw and ship it out. You are going to price something way too low. You are going to spend an hour researching something that's going to sell for $12. You are going to leave something behind that you find out a month later would sell for $300. Like, it's all of this is going to happen. The important thing is that you learn from them. Our entire life is a series of mistakes. The important thing is that we learn from our mistakes. Nobody's perfect. Nobody runs a flawless business. Not a single person. Everybody has good days and bad days. Everybody makes horrible mistakes. But this is a total mindset shift, right? Like, once you kind of shift that thinking of like, how dumb could I be, to like, oh, what am I learning right now? It's one of the most powerful things in any business. For me, I don't remember every great thing that I've bought and sold, but I absolutely remember every single piece where I look back and I think, what the heck was I thinking? Because those are the purchases, those are the mistakes I've made that have taught me the most, right? Like, you don't become a good reseller by making no mistakes. You become a good reseller by making fewer of the same mistakes, right? So guys, that's it. That's 10 things I wish I knew before I started reselling. Again, these are tips that are good for new resellers. These are also tips that are great for resellers that are 5 years into their journey. They're good for me. The entire idea for this video came from a conversation I was having with somebody else about this one skirt that I sold to this woman, and she really tried to like return it despite the fact that I had measurements in like 3 different places. And I was telling them how early on I didn't include measurements and how I'm like the biggest advocate for them right now. I'm like, you know what, this is a good idea for a video. But either way, guys, I hope you had fun. I hope some of this was helpful. I so appreciate you taking a little bit of your time to hang with me and chat reselling. But guys, if you had fun, please consider leaving a like or a comment on this video. Of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. I would love to have you along on this journey. All of that helps me out so much with YouTube. And don't forget, if you want to give Vendoo a try, click the link in the description down below and take 25% off of your first month. But without further ado, guys, I hope you have the most beautiful weekend. Happy hunting, and I will see you all in the next one.